Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. Over
the weekend, a heavy snowstorm hit Manitoba so hard it left many without power for days. First Nations in the Interlake region are still without hydro, heat, and water.
The chiefs in those areas called a state of emergency, and residents were evacuated to the city of Winnipeg. Jolene Banning has that story.
The Canadian Red Cross has been on standby since the chiefs of 6 rural First Nations declared a state of emergency. Cots have been set up in the RBC Convention Centre in downtown Winnipeg, and additional lodging has been secured at various hotels in the city. Jason Small speaks for the Red Cross.
As of early this morning, we had registered 5,700 evacuees. The vast majority of those are staying with friends and family or in hotels. We have one shelter that's open at the RBC Convention Centre, and last night we had about 120 people staying there.
However, not everyone feels supported during this evacuation. Amy Hunter is a mom to a family of 10 from Penamutang First Nation, 3 hours north of Winnipeg. She says she didn't get much help.
Leaving, we actually had a hydro pole block us in our driveway, so we had to shovel and dig our way out with a 4x4 and load all of our kids into one vehicle.
She's not the only one with concerns about how the evacuation efforts have gone down. Chief Cornell McLean from Lake Manitoba First Nation is worried about some of his older band members.
I said it yesterday that I was frustrated because my members were staying in a shelter, which is unacceptable because they're elders. They should be in hotel rooms where they're comfortable.
For now, the evacuees are waiting to see when their power will be restored so they can return home. Jolene Banning, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Nunavut Sivuniksavut is an Ottawa school for Nunavut high school graduates preparing for university. Their recent topic of focus, the federal election. Kent Driscoll caught up with the students to find out what some first-time voters are thinking.
On Rideau Street in Ottawa, there's a little bit of Nunavut hidden away. Nunavut Sivuniksavut has been turning out Nunavut leaders since before 1999, when the territory was founded. When we dropped by, they were studying federal politics, breaking down the platforms, and finding out what each party and candidate stands for.
The trees, the sidewalks, the stoplights, we don't have any of that back home.
Pearl Howard was born in Rankin Inlet, but lives in Cambridge Bay now. When the massive climate change protests hit Parliament Hill in September, she and her fellow students were there to remind everyone. Climate change hits the North first.
It was amazing. And to be a part of something so big in the capital of Canada, it made me feel proud to be who I am as an Inuk and from Nunavut.
Howard was most interested in learning what the parties are offering about climate change. Because in Nunavut, sea ice is a highway.
For centuries now, Inuit have been traveling back and forth from community to community, from Nunavut to Greenland through ice. And with climate change happening so drastically, it's getting harder and harder for Inuit to do that.
Lily Parr is from Cape Dorset. Her school was destroyed in an arson fire. So she moved south to complete high school and then got into the NS school. She watched the federal debate, and she found the Inuit content lacking.
When they were talking about the Indigenous issues, I was kind of disappointed because all they talked about was the pipelines.
The Trudeau Liberals have made 3 official apologies to Nunavut Inuit in the last year. For Parr, saying sorry is a start,
also,
but just a start.
With the apology, it would be amazing if something came along with it. For example, the TB apology, along with that apology, they brought they worked with NTI to help families across Nunavut and help them find their families in southern Canada who were buried, who were not able to come back home. I think with apologies, I think it's very important to start acting and helping Inuit move forward.
Kobe Aknavigak turns 18 2 days before the election. He wants to vote, and he's trying to set up a way to cast his ballot at home in Cambridge Bay. Casting his first ballot is important to him.
The only way that you could change society in a permanent way is to vote. And if you don't vote, you don't have the right to complain.
None of the students we talked to were willing to say who they are voting for. But from the sounds of it, the Liberals would have to really show young Kobe something to get his ex. We asked him about seeing Trudeau appear in Nunavut earlier in the week.
Oh, I was so mad. I was hoping that the communities would kick him out. That's how I truly felt. I honestly thought that they would, because he hasn't fulfilled any of the promises that he said that he was going to make.
Many of Nunavut's current leaders studied right here at NS. And for many of them, this was their first experience trying to understand Canada from an Inuit point of view while in the South. You're looking at Nunavut's future here. And so are they. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Ottawa.
We want to hear what you think. Here's how you can continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca. You can find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/APTN News. You can also follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more Indigenous news.
Winnipeg police are saying that no foul play was involved in the death of Mary Yellowback. Her body was discovered at a recycling depot in September 2018. At the time, police called her death suspicious. The 33-year-old from God's River First Nation was in Winnipeg for medical appointments. Her family said she was married, had 6 children, and was a community care worker.
As we reported Thursday, university presidents gathered in Sault Ste. Marie last week to talk reconciliation and how their institutions can play a more meaningful role in decolonization. The annual Reconciliation Forum is held in response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. Next year, the event moves to Quebec's Laval University. The school has brought in former missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry commissioner Michelle Audette as a senior advisor on reconciliation and education. Vice President Robert Beauregard says reconciliation still isn't about righting the past wrongs, but also current ones.
So to us, this is a more actual, current issue that we want to tackle, and that is more profoundly in the people's imagination. Because last week there was the Vien report that came out, and the Prime Minister of Quebec emitted formal apologies for the people, saying that the services, including the police services, were not up to the expectations and to the needs of the First Nations and the people.
Time for a quick break, and then we'll hear from one of the authors of a new report on resource development and Indigenous rights.
But first, here's a look at Wednesday's weather forecast. Starting off on the East Coast, we've got 15 and sunny in Charlottetown, 17 and sunshine in Halifax. Rain and 9 degrees for Happy Valley Goose Bay. Tomorrow, 5 and cloud in the La Grande River. Saint-Jean-Ville will be a mix of sun and cloud and 14 degrees, mostly sunny in Quebec City and 14. Peterborough will be rainy and 12 degrees, as is Toronto tomorrow, 8 for Sault Ste. Marie. 4 in snow and Sioux Lookout, snow and 3 degrees in Big Trout Lake. Mix of sun and cloud and 2 in Norway House, snow and 2 in God's Lake. Brandon will be mostly sunny, 5 degrees, same with Dauphin, mix of sun and cloud and 4 in Winnipeg. Lots of sunshine and hot in Swift Current, 16 degrees, 12 up in North Battleford and sunshine. 8 and rain in Buffalo Narrows, 4 and rain in Stony Rapids. Welcome back. The First Nations Power Authority is a nonprofit whose mission is to develop clean energy projects to reduce carbon emissions in Alberta. They were in Edson recently to educate people on the best practices to reduce their own carbon footprint. APTN's Chris Stewart has that story.
This Friendship Centre in Edson, Alberta is the second stop for the First Nations Power Authority as they tour across the West to help people make their own contribution to deal with climate change. A team of climate experts had a Q&A with the attendees. Maggie Hanna is from Common Green Energy. She gave advice on what to do if the power grid fails.
So when you think the grid's going to go out, you fill up your bathtub with water so that you have water for a few days, right? And then you share it with all your neighbors.
She cautions that the planet is at a tipping point.
The planet is balancing itself and rebalancing itself with the interaction between the oceans and the atmosphere and the land. And so all our relations and us, we have to adapt or not. And it's going to be a problem if it's not.
Guy Lonechild is the CEO of the First Nations Power Authority. He was happy to see an entire high school class in attendance.
We've got people from the local school asking some very important questions about what do you think about nuclear technology as a way of clean, a reliable source of energy to replace coal-fired plants. Really important aspects of what does our clean energy future look like in Alberta.
Cadence Gauthier is a grade 10 student. She says today's session had a lot of takeaways.
Like coming into this, I didn't know kind of much about anything, but now coming into it, realizing what us as youth can put into this and what we have a say in.
Maggie Wolfing is in grade 11. She says previous generations did not take care of the planet like they should have, and have left the youth with a mess.
Sometimes I have resentment for people from the older generations, but then I think there's no use being resentful towards them. I just have to deal with it. We all have to deal with it. But it's scary to think that we're not going to have the same life that the generations before us had. We're going to have to deal with what their actions, like what happened from their actions, and it's just scary.
2 more energy sessions will be held October 19th at the Slave Lake Friendship Center and October 21st at the Pincher Creek Friendship Center. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edson, Alberta.
The relationship between resource development and Indigenous rights has been a focus for many in the lead up to this month's federal election. But not all Indigenous nations and communities are against fossil fuel development. Many say it's a pathway out of poverty. That's the subject of a recent op-ed written for APTN News by John Paul, Executive Director of the Atlantic Policy Congress, and co-authored by Stephen Buffalo and Charlene Gale of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. John joined us earlier from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. John, thanks for joining us. You and your co-authors write that you are, quote, troubled that political parties and governments often listen to some First Nations but not others, particularly on matters relating to resource development, end quote. Can you explain?
Well, I guess that, we have different views from across the country related to resource development, and the government needs to pay attention to all those voices, not just a few. And I think that the intent of everybody is to create a better future for us and Canada to ensure that the planet is okay in the future, and really thinking ahead 7 generations in terms of protecting Mother Earth and protecting the environment, basically.
The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion is highlighted in the op-ed, and you say that First Nations supporting investment in the project have reached out to First Nations who are opposed. Can you tell us more about those talks?
Well, I just know that they are talking to people to explain that their intent is to create future prosperity for their people and their communities, and create something that creates wealth and a better future for them and their children and their grandchildren. And I think they are very serious about protecting the planet and ensuring whatever happens does include the adherence to all those protections of Mother Earth.
The piece also supports government recognition of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and Indigenous self-governance. Much of that debate has centered around free, prior, and informed consent and the right of a First Nation to say no to pipelines. Do you believe the government should be able to run a pipeline through the lands of nations that if they do not consent?
Well, I think it's a difficult decision to do that, and I think that governments do not take these things lightly, and they need to listen to communities. And basically, I think that the government, in its so-called wisdom is looking at the overall public interest in terms of what they're doing, and looking at it from that perspective. And you know, they've made their assessment on why they're doing and what they're doing, and I think they believe that it is best for the country.
John, what is the solution when one First Nation's land rights stand in the way of another nation's desire for economic development?
Well, it's a very difficult situation, and lots of time is needed to ensure clear discussions occur between the communities, even if they don't agree on something. I think that way more time needs to be built on building consensus across groups rather than isolating or creating conflicts with our people, between our people. I think that looking towards building consensus and versus just making trade-offs is always difficult, and there's winners and losers in those scenarios all the time. And you know, I think that inserting Indigenous values into these processes would produce a better outcome, basically. And I believe that you know, the insight and wisdom of all our people is very important in making important decisions like this, and to ensure that all the protections are made of our rights and of the Mother Earth as well, to ensure that what we do does stand the test of time.
John, we're going to have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time for us here.
Okay, then. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
An all-new episode of Face to Face airs tonight, right here after the news. Our guest this week is child welfare advocate Natasha Reimer Okima. Natasha was first placed into the child welfare system at the age of 1. She had 12 different placements, went to 4 different schools, and lived in 5 different towns before aging out of care.
It's really hard to get attached to places, people, or things. It's really hard to open up to people and try and form those relationships because everything's always changing, and it's very difficult to believe that this is going to be your last place, or believe that this is a safe space for you, and that you don't have to worry about being taken to another home or another school or another community, another town. And for me, that uneasiness has kind of been a crippling anxiety that's kind of followed me even to my adulthood.
We've got a wrap from the Vancouver International Film Festival when we come back after the break.
First, though, here's the rest of tomorrow's weather forecast.
Starting off in northern Alberta, we've got 8 in rain and high level in Fort Chip, 11 and sunny in Grand Prairie, 15 in sunshine in Edmonton, 16 in rain in Calgary. Rain and 17 in Penticton and Kamloops. Bella Coola is raining and 11. 11 in Sandspit with some rain, a mix of sun and cloud, and 5 in Fort Nelson. Mayo is 3 with some rain or snow, 0 and snow in Dawson City. Snowy and 2 in Norman Wells and Fort Simpson. Fort Laird is 2 and with a mix of sun and cloud. Sachs Harbor -2 and sunny skies. Polytech -4 and clear and sunshiny. Snow in Baker Lake -6. Arvin will be snowy -2. Tallyoak -5 with a mix of sun and cloud, and Pangerton mix of sun and cloud and 2 degrees. Welcome back. The annual Vancouver International Film Festival just wrapped up, and it was a big year for Indigenous stories. Tina House has more.
It was a proud night for the Tsleil-Waututh Nation as they walked the red carpet at the Vancouver International Film Festival to present their latest film, When the Tide Goes Out.
We're small. I think we're only about 200 people. They would have about 50 people out on the mud flats harvesting clam and crab, and we saw cod, and we saw flounder, saw sole.
The film shows how the Tsleil-Waututh Nation harvested clams from their traditional territory along the Burrard Inlet since time immemorial. Due to contamination from industry and other pollutants, That tradition came to a crashing end in 1972 when it became too dangerous to harvest traditional foods. By using historical photos and interviews, director Elliot Galan captured the journey of how the nation is once again able to harvest from the sea and what it means for future generations.
It was heartwarming, to say the least, to see them get to not only harvest the clams, to pass down that knowledge through the generations, but then to also reap the rewards of actually getting to taste clams from their territory for the first time in 45 years. I don't really have words for it.
When the tide went out, the table was set, and that means when the tide went out, there were all kinds of things to eat off the beach. It was everything that we could possibly want the inlet gave us.
Also walking the red carpet was master carver Robert Davidson and his wife Terry Lynn, both originally from Haida Gwaii. They debuted a film called Haida Modern, which is dedicated to Robert's life as a world-renowned artist and his activism.
I think that we are finally here. Like it's another foot in the door in Western culture. Like we've been shut out for so long, and all of a sudden, it's very exciting to be a part of it, and in a positive way.
I think there's no doubt that Robert is one of the great artists of the century and deserves to be here alongside these other great artists, as deserving of a place of installation in a place like this as a Calder, a Giacometti, a Henry Moore, any of the gods of 20th century art.
The film was directed by Charles Wilkinson. He says it was an honor to tell Robert's story and celebrate his achievements.
I've admired Robert's work for my entire adult life, and also the ideas that Robert expresses in his work and in his activism are ideas that I just feel are critical to our health and survival as a species.
Relearning what was given to us, it's our privilege and challenge to continually expand on that knowledge.
The Vancouver International Film Festival has now wrapped up after featuring 320 films and events to audiences across the city. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
And that is your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca.
Be sure to tune in tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central Time for a live episode of In Focus. We're going to be discussing housing both on and off reserve. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Thanks for tuning in.
And I'm Dennis Ward. Stick around for that new episode of Face to Face with Natasha Reimer Okima. That's next. Have a great night. I'll see you back here tomorrow.